There are serious restrictions of the right of assembly and other rights. Even the parents' right to exercise, to look after their children's health is under threat. The society is split right down families, partnerships, and friendships. And the split is growing, the gap is growing ever wider rather than. Young families are moving away from Berlin to the countryside because they expect less state repression. A man twice vaccinated, not because he is afraid for his health, but afraid about his freedom of movement, is demotivated and frustrated. At the end of the day, it's a question of utilizing this crisis to further develop our society to community with real humane targets and values.
We have the director of the RKI, Mr. Kohn. Thank you for the trust that you have put in me by inviting me to this expert group and assigning this interim role to me to direct the RKI. The first question would be that it's been 1.5 years of pandemic. That's quite a long time. People wonder on how long it's going to carry on for, and I've asked the office, have the actions not been the right as yet, so that it is still pertaining the situation? Well, we also have the sentinel practices, so not everybody gets into hospital, but we have the data of the health insurances, and so this data is not assessed. Maybe we'll get more information, but we have a number of instruments, and they are available in the RKI. I think it would be good that you get the people together and discuss this and look at the figures and look at the mismatches in the figures. I think that would be a good approach.
The risk of having the health system being overwhelmed, and we found that this has never been the case. Even in a press release of the former Minister of Health, it was said at a certain point that there was never a risk of the health system being overwhelmed, even though 27 clinics were closed last year.
True.
Well, the most interesting thing for me was that many physicians told us, you can't be crazy enough to vaccinate a very ill person, to vaccinate a dying person, but that's supposed to have happened. Do you know anything about it?
And nearly everybody is vaccinated.
Really?
Even people who are nearly dying. I saw a newspaper report of someone who was 101 who peacefully died after the vaccination.
What could be the medical reason for this?
Well, I don't think anybody spends a thought about this, because everybody can observe. You can observe this in every home. We get lots of feedback from directors and employees that monitor what's going on, that after the vaccinations we have positive corona positive explosions. Many died, many didn't, and before that wasn't the case, so that is part of the characteristics. So they are evaluated as corona deaths, not as vaccination victims, and there is no systematic checking on the effect that the vaccination has had. What occurred and how many died, that is something that I would ask for that to you and the new government, that here clearly we do a dedicated monitoring what is going on after the vaccination, and that could be done.
So that's the collateral consequences of the vaccinations.
Yes, currently we focus on the corona things, and it said only that only vaccinated people can can have corona, because the population is mainly the risk group is fully vaccinated. There's hardly anybody above 70 that are not vaccinated, but those are the people that get sick of corona and that are in intensive care. What happened there is something I've never imagined. I've been 50 years in this profession, isolating people in great need, especially people who are suffering these sicknesses, who can't understand why the only person that they still remember and recognize, why don't they come, and why do I have to stay in my room? This is a human and legally it's a horrible situation. To do a lockdown here, this is something that put a risk to everyone. And the staff has changed in a negative way. So in times of Corona, the elderly homes have become worse than prisons, really. And so we have to balance this out here, and the social contact is more important than medicine. And so these are the things that really have to be checked and clarified. And then we have all this issue of fear, isolation that develops and derives from this. And these elderly people withdraw by themselves. They can't move in their environment. They can't have food together. They are alone in their rooms. And at the topmost, and you can read this in any textbook, that somebody who is already sick must be excluded from vaccination, and you can't vaccinate into a pandemic. This is something where we have to point out Bergamo, where this mistake was made. Healthy people are vaccinated. So we don't vaccinate against flu during the flu season. We do that in summer to prepare. So this is a completely erroneous approach, which, especially in this question here, is ad absurdum, really.
So what's the basis for declaring this pandemic? What was the basis for declaring so many cases of infected people who are the problem here?
The definition of the case, which is given by the PCR test, the PCR test is unsuitable to determine conditions and infectious rate. It just measures molecules, and I heard this in an American presentation. It is like if you look for dogs and you measure the dog poo in the streets, that doesn't tell you whether there's a dog around and whether it'll bite you or not. Could be a year ago if you have sensitive enough methods. So what we measure there is the activity of those people who do the PCR tests, nothing else. And that mirrored an apparent pandemic to us. That was a test, an expensive and unuseful application of this PCR test, which didn't tell us whether there is an infection or not around. That a Robert Koch Institute doesn't know this has personal consequences, and it has had so.
Across the board, the people who don't have any symptoms isn't only pointless, but also burns money for no reason. Is that the case? Or is there any point behind this?
Well, it has no medical point to it. Normally, Mr. Chancellor, we have good authorities who answer these questions, like 𝗏𝗏𝗃, and they have not been asked at all. They have not been asked whether it makes sense to carry out this PCR test. Do they tell us anything, which is gross negligence? I think the former health minister should have done this immediately. I'm going to take all means available to me, including the communication means. I remind everybody of what the job of the legal system actually is, because as to my appearance, there seems to be a cognitive resonancy in major parts of the legal system that they seem to have forgotten that juridical decisions, first of all, have to be based on factual evidence. We'll have to ask whether and why some investigations have not been taken up in quite clear situations here. I'm, for example, referring to complaints with the significant death of a high number of elderly people in elderly homes after COVID-19 vaccinations. But so as a Ministry of Justice here, I am facing a bankruptcy of the legal system because quite provenly only individual attorneys and judges have proven to stand up to their task. And this is something that must not ever repeat in the future again.
Dr. Holzeisen, my impression is that what's necessary here is a information campaign, really, and I would actually want to speak in favor of the judges, particularly my ministry, when it was when the minister was Mr. Seehofer. There was this panic paper that was distributed there, so that many representatives of the government, of the former government, spread fears about the dangers of this virus. And of course, the judges heard these warnings as well. And if you're under this impression, there are many analyses of what this does psychologically to people, then I can believe that many judges simply believed these campaigns. And I have to say that there is a lot of responsibility in my ministry, and we can discuss this, of course, later on. We should never approach people with a panic campaign, as it were, particularly when it's not in the context of a really dangerous situation where there is no imminent threat to danger. Of course, I have to let somebody know that they're about to kill themselves, that they're just about to jump off a cliff. But if there is another situation that is less dangerous, then I think we shouldn't spread such views, such fears. And I think we need to have an information campaign among the judges to let them know that they need to take a different view here, that because as soon as we have clarified where the risks are, be it with the virus or the vaccination, if we can take this out there to the judges, then I can imagine that their judgments will change, and their judgments will change.
Do we need an investigative committee? Because the analysis that you have just presented is not quite frank and open, but it covers to what we have seen. Two of us are lawyers, the Minister of Interior and myself, that things have not started, investigations have not started, although there's most concrete points, one of them being a pathologist who indicated that people died after the vaccination. Nothing happened. If the industry, in this case the tech and pharma industry, think that they are beyond the legal system and can make their money wherever they want, that part of the politics have gone to their side. If they think they are beyond the legal system and the politics don't do that job, then the last anchor is the legal system. And if it fails in the way that all three of us seem to have perceived it, and parts of the population have as well, would we not need an investigative committee?
Of course we do. We can only clarify that in the context of an inquest.
You've just said this mustn't happen again. It did happen before. It didn't happen after the Third Reich. Nothing changed. There's this famous book by Professor 𝗚𝗎𝗄, disastrous legal people, that there was a full collapse of the legal system in the Third Reich, similar to what we have to witness now, and that after that, exactly the people who were responsible for this slipped back into the old positions. And then I'd like to make clear that in this pandemic situation, it's extremely rare. There's no example for our society that we've had this before and that we have to find solutions for this. This is something that it's pre-programmed, that there is going to be failures and errors.
Well, I could bear witness here. I know many people who are academics, as engineers, scientists, etc. I'm surprised again and again how many of them are absolutely convinced that we have a dangerous disease out there, that you need protection through vaccinations, through this filter bag. It really surprises me. But the fact is, that's the perception, and I could never have imagined that the main newscast on German TV gives a less than objective viewpoint in their report, shall we put it this way.
So, against this background, can we state the finding that we don't have a condition for a pandemic of national scale with a risk for the health system? Can we agree to that?
We've really monitored the whole thing in depth, all of us. We never found an argument against this. We've seen all those things in the official statistics. That's not contradictory. There's no evident alternative data that show the contrary. This virus is an influenza virus. It's part of the normal cold viruses. No matter how it changes, our body will be able to deal with it. The vast majority of the population is immune against it. And the second thing is, we compared our health system with other European health systems. We have the most lavishly appointed one. We have the largest number of intensive care beds. I have to say, I'm really a bit sick of this discussion. We don't have to keep repeating this. We are falling for the narrative of the others. That's not the topic. It's clear the virus is not more dangerous than influenza virus is, and the health system is not overwhelmed. End of. And if I juxtapose this to the psychological but also physical damage caused with the elderly, the ill, children, I would immediately come to the conclusion, the interim conclusion, that there is no no sufficient basis to continue these measures.
We have a massive human damage, a massive economic damage caused by this, and the main fruit is still be there. It's like an oil tanker. It takes a time to slow down and stop. We are only in the first mile, and I don't really want to think about this.
You just mentioned it, the interruption of the supply chains because somewhere a single person in a Chinese harbor was tested positive. They closed the entire port. I don't know where it was.
The first time close to Shenzhen, opposite to Hong Kong, and now in Ningbo, the biggest port at all.
And the upshot is, and I just got this morning, Audi has to declare short-term labor for 10,000 staff members for supply problems, and that's only the beginning.
But what's important here, which is definitely something that needs to be discussed at the government level and with the population, we all gonna die. It's not a drama. And when you're old, you're allowed to die. I think it's horrible if we hear it's horrible if people die of whatever. Everybody's gonna die at some point, and we just have to get back to the point that we say
we have to accept in general.
And exactly, because we know that that is the end, we have to pick up the people to have an end of their life in dignity, and not as what we see, apparently, allegedly, to save them. That is pure ridiculous, that's ludicrous, and I think this is something where basically, fundamentally, we have to talk about the ethical level that we are looking at here in the new government. Well, we should see what a pandemic is and when we last time saw one. It's getting me nervous. I made this remark because I said we are falling for it already. If 100 years after the First World War, we are talking about this happening again. In our health system, the knowledge that we have, the antibiotics that we have, that tuberculosis has been fought successfully, that is something at the time when traffic did work, but no antibiotics were available, that would have been possible for a short period of time, but people starved to death. There were poor social conditions at this time. But this one thing which is disputed also in terms of causes, the only thing that we can think of if we're talking about a worldwide pandemic. Other ways, it is the measles or whatever. It was only regional things, nothing that distributed across the world. That was not the point. Smallpox was the reference here. And since we are in a modern world, this has vanished completely. So if we say this is something that we have to assume coming any time, it's a business idea, dear colleagues, nothing else.